This is the PS Vita. Released in 2012, it can play all PS1 games natively, it can play all PSP games natively, it can be overclocked, it's a media player, it can play all sorts of retro consoles via emulation, you can link it to your computer and play Steam on it, you can play a handful of PS2 games such as Grand Theft Auto and Bully that have been ported across. Sound good? Well, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that the reason you can do all of these things on this console is not because Sony wanted you to be able to do them, but rather Sony made a massive, monumental, ridiculous mistake when designing the security of this device. And that mistake allowed people from teams like Team Molecule to come in and jailbreak it. And if you've ever wondered how they do that, you're watching the right video. It took 5 years for hackers to break past Sony's security and unlock the Vita. A far cry from the 3 months it took to get past the PSP's security. Sony learned from the mistakes of the PSP and they invested wisely. The PS Vita ran a completely proprietary, security-hardened operating system on a custom-designed chip. So in comparison to the PSP, why did hacking the Vita take so long? It's a bit of a catch-22. You see, you need access to the firmware code in order to go through it and find exploits in the code itself. But in order to get access to the code, you first need to find an exploit. So if that's the case, how are there any systems hacked for the first time? Well, the most common scenario is that the first version of the firmware released is insecure. Take the PSP for example. Firmware version 1.0 had unencrypted kernel modules. Exploiters could therefore access the code on the device, read through it in plain text, and find an exploit in the code. By exploit, I basically mean a mistake made during the creation of the code that would allow them to do things that the original author hadn't intended them to be able to do. This was the same with the first iPhone. The first version allowed you to read from the file system, you could analyze the unencrypted code and find exploits in it. The Vita, on the other hand, had a secure original firmware with no file system access and it had proper encryption. So it's a really good thing that Sony made a mistake when designing the PS Vita. To put very simply, before the PS Vita will execute code, it will attempt to decrypt it using its key. However, only code signed with Sony's private key will make sense when it is unencrypted by the device. The Vita will check that the code was signed by the correct key before it will execute it, and there are different keys for different authorizations levels within the system. The manufacturer of the console will guard these master keys extremely well, as if they were released then anyone could sign code and have the console execute it. So, like lots of consoles, the PS Vita has private keys, and these private keys are used to sign official copies of games, firmware, updates to the console so that the PS Vita knows that it's okay to execute them. If we could get hold of these keys, then we'd be able to put whatever software we wanted on the PS Vita. So what about brute forcing a private key? Just trying lots and lots of different combinations until we get one that works, until we get the key that Sony put in the device. Well, the key is encrypted using AES-128. The EE Times wrote a paper in 2012 suggesting it would take a supercomputer 1 billion years to brute force the encryption, so you'd be a fool to even try. Well, it would take 1 billion years unless Sony forgot to change their private key from a default value they'd created to make debugging easier when they were producing this thing. That's right, the bootloader master key was brute forced in a couple of days because it was a single letter repeating 16 times, and it's a letter you'd probably most likely associate with the default value. Now legally I don't think I'm allowed to tell you what that letter is and what Sony's private key is, so instead here's an unrelated image I found on the internet. Now the question for all of you down below, were the people that found this exploit incredibly smart or incredibly stupid for even trying to brute force this key? The key is never found in any code anywhere in the PS Vita software. It only exists in the crypto processor within the PS Vita. And it's most likely the bootloader master key was set at this value to make it quicker during the creation and debugging stages of the PSP to input it. Because this key is so well hidden away, it looks like someone left this key in and no one found out about it, and they forgot about it. To put it bluntly, Sony spent years creating an almost impenetrable device in the PS Vita. And then they forgot to change the default password. Once this key had been discovered, the team were able to use it to decipher all the other keys on the system and fully open the Vita. Thanks for watching guys, I hope you liked the video. If you did like the video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button to see more like this, and I'll see you guys in the next one.